right now, we're going to talk about the last two picks. This has garnered a lot of the attention, and we get it, deservedly so. And that is, first of all, going after Dillon Gabriel in the third round, and also taking him ahead of Shedeur Sanders, and then being able to come back in round 5 and still you see Shedeur Sanders. So really a lot to unpack here. I want to start off, first of all, with Gabriel. So when we were talking about Gabriel on our last shows and our pre-draft discussions, it was more of, hey, you know what? The kid's got he's got a lot of experience, big time football, had a breakout year, almost kind of reminded you of like Brock Purdy, that he's got a lot of experience and he's probably going to get drafted in the 5th or 6th round because of his size, but keep an eye on him. He's somebody that could be a nice little sleeper like Brock Purdy. I'm not sure we ever imagined that he was going to go as early as round 3. So how surprised were you that they, first of all, picked Gabriel in round 3 and then picked Gabriel at all over another quarterback?
I was pretty surprised because draft night, the talk with Tommy Rees, former about Alabama offensive coordinator, and his connection with Jalen Milroe. We know they liked Milroe. I knew they liked Will Howard. I knew they liked Sanders. We just didn't know how much they liked him. I never really heard Gabriel. He kind of went under the radar. When they had those quarterbacks in town for private workouts, just about all of them were mentioned, but Gabriel. I don't know if they just, if nobody was seeking it out, but I really didn't hear his name mentioned. In fact, I went to the combine. I interviewed or sat in on almost all their interviews, but Gabriel was kind of an afterthought. I didn't even video him or wasn't in his get together for the reasons you mentioned, size and so forth. But after the draft process, Andrew Berry said he's kind of a guy we had slated or pegged that if he was there at the end of the 3rd round, that's where we were looking to take him. And so they took him at 94, which, was that the trade or who they got in the trade for Amari Cooper. So basically when they traded Amari Cooper, they got Dillon Gabriel out of it. So yeah, I had heard that night and talking to some of the sources I was talking to when he said, okay, if Sanders and Milroe are still there, are the Browns going to take one of them two? And he said, I don't know about that, but keep an eye on Will Howard. Well, they didn't take any of them. No. They took Dillon Gabriel. So I will say this, in talking to him and watching him for 2 days, he has a strong arm, and his ball was very impressive coming out, very tight spiral compared to what I saw from Shedeur Sanders. He looked like he had a stronger arm. And you know what he reminded me more of? You said Brock Purdy. What he reminded me more of Russell Wilson, a left-handed Russell Wilson. When he came out, I don't remember the fanfare of Russell Wilson when he came out. I think he was a 3rd-round pick of the Seahawks. I don't remember if he was supposed to get drafted higher or lower or what, but I know he had transferred from like North Carolina State to Wisconsin and got drafted in the 3rd round. He's very stout, good arm. I think if he was 6'2", 6'3", he might have been the first quarterback taken. Obviously, that's a big if.
Yeah.
But I had been around Johnny Manziel. I had been around Baker Mayfield. I don't like the smaller quarterback just because, of what goes along with that. But obviously, he's found a way around that. I mean, Oregon's, being the Big Ten Offensive Player of the Year. Who knows?
Yep.
So I was pretty impressed with what I saw. And I think for a 3rd-round pick, there's not a lot of, you're not going to say, oh my gosh, you took that guy with the 2nd pick of the draft.
Yes,
and
exactly.
He's a bust.
Yeah.
I mean, if he's long-term and ends up being a backup even, I don't know if that's a bad thing, but I think he seems to have a lot of intangibles, obviously to play at Oklahoma and Oregon and Central Florida. You got to do something right. And to set the records he did. We'll see, how he holds up.
Well, it helps to have all of that experience, no question about it. And it's funny too, because that's another thing we talked a lot about was that, all right, we can see Cam Ward and he deserves to be maybe the top quarterback of the class. But we kept saying, telling you, you watch, there's going to be 3 or 4 other quarterbacks. I think Howard is one of them. Even Gabriel could have been another, that we just thought that when it's all said and done, that they were going to end up better quarterbacks than Shedeur Sanders. But we didn't expect Shedeur Sanders not to go in the first round or in the top 5, which was a lot of the speculation. Instead, the Browns are able to get him in the 5th round. So when did you start getting word yourself that this was also going to be a possibility? Not until the pick, because it's very rare, of course, to take 2 quarterbacks in one draft class, especially the way the Browns now have 5 quarterbacks, even though Watson's never going to play for them. 4 is even a lot. The way the NFL rosters are set nowadays. So yeah, how surprising were you when the Sanders pick was made?
Well, I was surprised a little bit just because there wasn't much on the radar that, I mean, there was so much, there was talk up until a week or 2 before the draft. A lot of the even local media, national media were convinced they were still going to take him. And if they didn't take him at 2, they would trade up into the first round if they could to take him, or for sure take him with the first pick in the second round if he was still there. I don't know how to evaluate this, Greg. It's eyes in the beauty of the beholder. I was pretty impressed with him when he met with us on Saturday and talked for the first time along with Gabriel. He said, I don't know, why. He was asked why he's so popular. He says, I really don't know, what. And he asked the question back, why do you guys think I am? He's very likable. And he said, 99% of the hate comes because of his dad. People just don't like his dad.
Yeah.
And I found him as very engaging. After he was drafted, he immediately showed up in Cleveland. He was showing up at local high schools, and working out with local high school football teams in the inner city. And it was like, he said, I don't do that for show. I do that wherever college, so I haven't really followed him much, but I was pretty impressed. He stayed on the field the first 2 days that I was there, about 20 minutes, 30 minutes after practice, throwing with some tryout players, working on throwing. I thought he looked pretty good to me. He looked different than Gabriel. The first day, I thought Gabriel looked a lot better. Second day, I thought they were about the same. He throws some pretty good balls. I know he attracts attention. The first video I put out of him, the last I looked, had over 500,000 views. It was just him, taking a handoff to a running back. I had 2 videos that had over 1 million views on X. And, obviously I've been through this with Johnny Manziel and Baker Mayfield and Odell Beckham. And, I don't know how it'll play out, but Andrew Berry said that it came down to value. And this is the point I want to make, is that they look at players as assets. And I think particularly quarterbacks, because it's a quarterback driven league. And when it came down that at the 144th pick, he was still on the board, they clearly had him evaluated as much higher than a 5th round pick.
Sure.
And a lot of people said that Jimmy Haslam, the owner, made that pick. I think this is what he said. Haslam let us do our job. They went to him. I believe this is what happened. Something to the point, Mr. Haslam, we have this as a really good value right now to trade for. But do you want the, I don't know if headache's the word, but maybe the attention.
Yeah.
I don't think it was so much him wanted to make the pick. It was more like, hey, you want to veto this? Because we won't go there if you don't want this.
Okay.
And obviously they traded 2 of their late picks to move up and drafted Sanders. So I clearly think they had Gabriel rated higher, at the end of the 3rd round, but they took him about in the middle of the 5th round. So whether they had him a little lower in the 3rd round or higher in the 4th round or whatever, but when he was there in the 5th round, they felt like there's
Oh,
an
yeah.
asset. If both Gabriel and Sanders play well in the preseason and everybody's raving about them, or a year from now somebody loses a quarterback
Sure.
and they're not sold long term that they're the long term answer, you can trade one of them for a
Yeah.
draft pick
Yeah.
and recoup, what you tried there. Or I could very well see Sanders and Gabriel kind of being the long term 1-2 or 2-3, on this team if they really like them
Why
because they're
not?
under that rookie contract. So,
Yep.
that's kind of where it is.
All right. So, and that makes a lot of sense that if we're looking at 4 quarterbacks, and of course Watson's got to be there. What is your best guess on how you think it's going to shake out with the final roster, with the veterans? I mean, is Kenny Pickett potentially the odd man out now?
Well, that's a good question. They're not going to have 4 quarterbacks on the active rosters. Watson's going to be on PUP. But of these 4, the strange one was the Joe Flacco that they made that move a couple weeks before the draft. I thought they would wait and see how the draft went. I think if they started right now, Kenny Pickett would be the starting quarterback.
Okay.
Unless Gabriel and Sanders really take off, one of them takes it. Because, Greg, the first move they made, we talked about the whole offseason of getting the quarterback. And what did they do? They went out and went after Kenny Pickett. They didn't just say, well,
True.
we'll take him.
Yeah.
I thought when they traded DTR to the Eagles for Pickett that you're just exchanging third string quarterbacks, or maybe, he'd be competing for the second. I'm not saying this in disrespect, but when he interviewed with us on Zoom, he said, well, they told me I'm expecting to compete for the starting job. We're like, yeah, right. Because he played for the Steelers, and a lot of the people that covered kind of felt like as long as Pickett's the starting quarterback of the Steelers, Browns are in great shape, and then obviously they moved on from him. So I think, though, I think they see him as a guy that fits into Kevin Stefanski's offense and can do a lot better. He had the Matt Canada kind of a debacle when he was over there,
That's true. Yep.
And so we'll see. But I go back, they sought Pickett out. They went to the Eagles to seek out that trade.
Okay.
I know Andrew Berry really liked him coming out of the draft. He said so a couple times. So he was a first-round pick. They gave up a 5th-round pick in DTR, and he wasn't going to be, they thought they were going to play an offense more suited to Deshaun Watson and DTR, and they're clearly going back to a different style, which I think Pickett. I mean, Joe Flacco's 40 years old. He's not the future. You could make an argument he could be the settlement with the 2 rookies, or you could say, well, we'll move on from Joe. And I don't think they would keep both, or they would trade or cut one of the rookies. Andrew Berry's never cut one of his draft picks the year that he's drafted them.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And so I'm pretty sure that the difference is the value. Pickett's guaranteed $2.6 million. Flacco's like $3 million. If the Saints come calling, would you trade? Would they want Flacco or would they want Pickett? Last year, they brought in Tyler Huntley, and everybody wondered, why in the world did you bring in him with DTR, Jameis Winston, and Deshaun Watson? And they kept 4 quarterbacks on the final cut, trying to trade Winston or Huntley, and they couldn't get any offers, and they ended up then hunting or cutting Huntley a day or two and he went on the Dolphins or something. So I could see them trying to trade one right up until, after the cuts, but see if a team loses a guy. But it depends on what Gabriel and Sanders do. If they go into the season and say, we're going with Gabriel as our starter from the get-go, or we're going with Sanders from the get-go. Everybody said the most ready to play in the NFL was Sanders. he could be the number 2 pick. So who knows?
Yeah.
Regardless of what they thought about him, but maybe Kenny Pickett will win the job, and then Joe Flacco will be the odd man out. So
yes,
I don't know, but they're not going to keep 4, but we'll see if they. I mean, Pickett's younger, 2.6 million is an easy to trade. If somebody says, "Yeah, we like what we saw, we'll take him," but the Browns might say, "No, we're going to keep him," because then we got 3 quarterbacks, and depending on what happens this year, we'll go from there.
Well, it's a nice problem to have. I don't think there's any question about it. Like you said, especially at that quarterback position, everybody's looking for quarterbacks. So Browns have 4 of them, and we'll see if any of them can win the job and take the job. And I'm sure they're going to give them as much time as possible to do that.